I'm good, and don't call me Mr. Altman.
Oh,
That was my dad. You can
okay.
call me Eric.
All right. Thank you, Eric. How are things going in Irwin, PA?
Busy as always. Yeah, sorry I wasn't able to do the live show with you guys. Things are just always chaotic and hectic here, so I'm glad we were able to set aside some time to talk on this recorded edition.
Hey, no problem. We're glad to have you on here. Well, anyway, I first met you, as you might remember, at Albatwitch Day in Columbia, hosted by another fine researcher of Bigfoot and the paranormal, Rick Fisher. You guys are both great to give me an interview. This time we won't be impacted by a band playing in the background. I had about 5 or 6 minutes, and then the band started going, and we had to talk over the band. That made for quite an interesting little interview.
That was fun.
It was. It was. You have to have an interest, something chaotic to happen every once in a while. Especially when trying to do it live, too. That was a live broadcast I was doing. Well, you also had a nice collection of footprints at Albatwitch Day, and people will be able to hear you on today's broadcast, obviously, which is a big plus. All right. I'd like to know first, what got you into Bigfoot, crypto, and paranormal research?
Well, I've been fascinated in all three subjects since I was a little kid. Grew up a fan of the B horror and sci-fi films, and I was about 10 years old in 1980 when I saw the film Legend of Boggy Creek, and that was really a catalyst to get me involved in studying cryptids and especially Bigfoot, the Bigfoot phenomenon. It was kind of fascinating to realize that the possibility that there could be an actual real live monster existing, and people were seeing it and claiming to experience it and having encounters with it. So I wanted to find out for myself if there was anything really to the phenomenon, and began studying the subject by reading books, watching films, TV shows, anything I could get my hands on. And of course, I was also interested in the paranormal and studying UFOs and anything strange and unusual. I like to kind of dabble in. So from probably about the age of 10 until about the age of 27, I spent a good time just educating myself, learning more about the subject than just jumping right in feet first, and kind of wanted to understand the mechanics of how the subject works, and what it entails, where the sightings occur, what people are describing. So I had a better understanding of what I would be getting into before I started researching.
I took notice you grew up, you indicate you spent a lot of time at your local school and public libraries, educating yourself on supernatural and unusual world around us books, magazines, newspapers, that type of stuff. It may be a little rough, but any you'd recommend and your favorite authors for people? We have some new people or some young people that might be watching.
Well, I actually grabbed a couple books off of my bookshelf here, and I'll share them with you if you don't mind.
Certainly.
This is a classic, and it's a hard to find book, but if you can see it, it's called Bigfoot. It's by Amby Slate and Alan Berry. It has some great classic stories in it. There's some in there about the Ron Moorhead's experiences from the early 1970s, which now everybody knows as the Sierra Sounds. There's actually an article in here, a chapter in here about Bigfoot in Pennsylvania, which I found fascinating. So definitely a must read. Another one by Don Hunter and Renee DeHinden called Sasquatch. If you guys can see that real well. Another favorite of mine growing up. Peter Byrne wrote a book called Bigfoot, Monster, Man, or Myth. It's really good. Another good book. And a couple other real quick favorites. Sasquatch Apparitions by Barbara Wassen. A very rare, hard to find book, but an excellent read. This one is out of print, and if you find this at a bookstore or online or anywhere like that, grab it, because you won't find it anywhere. I mean, it was a limited edition run, the first series that came out. The gentleman was going to put out a second edition, but he never released it. But it's called Bigfoot on the East Coast by Rick Berry, and it chronicles sightings all up and down the East Coast. And it's a fascinating read. Little summaries of each sighting report. And of course, I highly recommend anybody reading this book if you have not yet. Sasquatch, The Apes Among Us by John Green. This is the Bible of Bigfoot research. So before you get into studying and examining it, read this book. This book will teach you pretty much everything you need to know about studying the subject. And that's really one of the first books I started to read and got to read and understand and learn about the subject matter. John Green, who passed away just a few years ago, along with Renee DeHinden, Peter Byrne, and Grover Krantz. They were considered the four horsemen of Sasquatch, kind of our elders, if you will. And they were really pretty much there was a few others thrown in there as well, Bob Titmus and a few others, but they were pretty much the four gentlemen who got Sasquatch research started and the modern age of Sasquatch research here in the United States and Canada. And those guys, I would strongly recommend anybody getting into the field to want to study the subject to read their books, try to learn about their research and the research methods and techniques. John Green has put out several books that you can find on eBay and Amazon and places like that, even Bigfoot conferences. But definitely pick up his books. It's a wealth of information and knowledge shared, and you can really benefit from those kinds of books.
That's awesome. Also, you indicated a great guy was your mentor, Stan Gordon. Just a normal question. What was it like to meet your mentor and someone who you looked up to? And a number of people on this show also think very highly of him as well, certainly.
Yeah, Stan's been an investigator now for going on 62 years. He started when he was around my age at 10. That's when he got into studying the subject. And I believe he's just over 72 now. So he's been doing this about 62 years. And I met Stan when I was 13 at the local mall. I live in Irwin, Pennsylvania now, but I lived in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, which is also Stan's hometown. And everybody around here knew Stan. He was the UFO Bigfoot guy at that time when I was getting into it. And I met him at the local mall. He used to hold a weekend UFO and Bigfoot exhibit. And he would display casts, pictures, articles, books, that sort of thing. He would share information. Plus, he'd take sighting reports and encounters from people that came to the exhibit. And at 13 years old, I was fascinated, still learning about the subject. And I approached him and started asking questions. And instead of shooing me away like an annoying kid, saying, get out of here, you bug me, he actually kind of mentored me from that point on. He began answering my questions. He took time to talk to me. We formed an instant friendship, and I've known Stan now since I've been 13. So, gosh, 37 years now. So, yeah, it's been a long friendship. And as I continued into actually field work and studying, Stan was always the go-to guy to bounce ideas off of, to ask questions of, to talk to. And Stan and I talk on the phone twice a week now. We correspond. We've investigated cases together, countless cases together. He's a consultant for the Pennsylvania Bigfoot Society, and he's a very dear friend. And I can't tell you how much I'm grateful for his influence, his mentoring, and being able to develop in this field under someone such as Stan. And another suggestion for your listeners and for those who are getting into this or just started into this, if you can find a mentor in the field who's been doing this for a long time, start studying what they do and start studying underneath them, because you'll learn a tremendous amount and they'll really help you develop and blossom as a researcher.
That's awesome. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have a quick question for you, Eric, in regards to what we've been talking to. The books you've showed us, everything like that, and whatnot. How would you say over the years, spilling into the 21st century, modern day, how would you say field research for this topic has evolved or advanced? From the time that the Four Horsemen kind of launched this crusade that we've been running with all this time.
It's changed dramatically from when they were in it to when I got into it, and even now. Back when they were doing it, there was only a handful, maybe 24 people that were doing it. And of course, back then we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have internet, we didn't have any of the modern things we have today, the modern technology. So they relied on letters, writing each other letters. They relied on phone calls, and they relied on going to each other's homes to talk in person. So there was a lot more, in my opinion, you were able to really get to know a researcher in person rather than through Facebook or Twitter. So that really helped. And you got to learn someone's character and their credibility, and you got to work with them side by side rather than through these social media platforms. When I got into it, again, there wasn't the cell phones or internet, anything like that. And technology was limited. We had, the 35 millimeter cameras were just starting to come into their own, but usually they were like a cheap Kodak camera. You remember those little square cameras, if you remember them?
Oh yeah, the ones you click and you had to.
Yep.
Yeah.
You had to put the film in the back, and you had to slide it to advance to the next film, and we had to carry these big cassette recorders out in the woods with us, not just the little digital ones we have now, but these big honking things. So it's changed a lot, and the communication has changed a lot as well. Now we're able to easily, like we're doing today, we're doing a podcast, and you're able to talk to me. I'm able to talk to you, and we're not in the same room. We're not even probably in the same city, and that's great. But it also opened a can of worms for a lot of bad things as well, because now people have become lazy. They don't do the research. They rely on YouTube. They rely on other people's research to really find out answers. And that's great to an aspect, to a point, but people aren't doing their own research. They're believing what other people say. They're taking everybody's word for what goes on instead of finding out for themselves and doing the actual legwork to see if it's real or not, or if there's any truth to it. So technology is advanced, which is great. We've got thermal FLIR, we've got night vision, we've got all kinds of recording devices and listening devices, game cameras. We've got so much technology. We've got environmental DNA, we've got physical DNA, which we can study plants, we can study hair, we can study fecal matter, that kind of stuff, bones. So we have a lot of advantages today, but like I said, there's a lot of bad stuff to it as well. So to be perfectly honest with you, I would much rather go back to the old ways of doing research, when you actually have to call somebody on the phone to talk to them directly, or you have to write them a letter, or you have to go to their house. When I got into field research back in 1997, there was 3 of us doing it. Myself, Steve Anderson, and Henry Benton. And the 3 of us every weekend, regardless of if we were busy or not, would hit those woods. And we'd explore places we heard rumors there was stuff going on, or we'd spend weekends in historical locations where there had been sightings, just to see the area and learn the area. And I did that a lot for myself, so I could understand the environment, the habitat, the food source, the water source, to see what was there, why was that creature there, maybe to get some answers for myself. So I much prefer going back to the old ways of doing research than what it is now. But it's really evolved, I should say, to where it is today, based on what they had to deal with back then.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely. So it definitely seems that you value just that, those personal relationships, how things are on a personal level between researchers in that regard. I definitely think too nowadays, just that all the technology we have, the resources and abilities we have now in terms of just communication, what information out there is available, what resources. I just really think that degree of connectivity is definitely significant. And I definitely agree, though, that that personal element that you really cherish and value. It's probably definitely lacking more nowadays. My biggest concern, though, too, just in regards to these advancements, everything like that, like you said, it has opened its own can of worms, its own set of problems. My biggest thing is this type of 14 research. It's difficult enough to have mainstream media, mainstream science take it seriously. And I really think that one of the biggest reasons is, all the hoaxing and, how easily some of these instances are debunked. I know out there with there's software programs like Photoshop and things like that, it's definitely a lot easier to put out a hoax photo. But I also feel like the technological resources we have at our disposal now also kind of makes it easier to identify and debunk some of these, hoaxes that are, that circulate around the internet and gain traction so quickly. So the other question I have for you is, in that regard, do you think the technological advancements, how technology is being utilized in this field, is more so helping or hurting, just in terms of setbacks that we deal with, the abundance of hoaxing and things like that?
It does help in some aspects, because like with the thermal FLIR, for example, you can see a heat source in a dark forest where you couldn't before. You'd have to rely on flashlights and hope that you might have seen something, or even then you couldn't positively identify it. With the thermal FLIR, you have a much better chance of identifying what that heat source is and what kind of animal it is. So there are some good technological advances that are out there. The bad thing that I mentioned, and I don't want to dwell on this too much, is social media is a horrible thing for Bigfoot research. And YouTube is one of the worst, and I'll say it again, the worst media outlet for Bigfoot research. Yes, and to explain why, it gives everybody, not just researchers, but everybody, the access to put up videos. And as you mentioned, Bigfoot videos can be easily faked, easily hoaxed, and there's so many people out there wanting to believe in the subject that they see a YouTube video and they see a shadowy figure or something dark through the forest that they can't recognize, and right away they believe it's a Bigfoot, and they're convinced it's a Bigfoot. There's nothing else. So there's a lot of objectivity that's been lost. Instead of, like I mentioned, them doing their own research and getting out there and finding out for themselves, they rely on these videos and they rely on these social media platforms to do the work for them. And that's not a good idea. You lose objectivity. You don't find out for yourself if the subject is real or not. I personally, to be honest with you, I hate YouTube videos, as you probably couldn't guess. But I do, simply because there's so much garbage on YouTube. And anybody can put out a video, and anybody can put on a suit, and it's a little slightly blurry, and they can run through the forest and make a claim that it's a Bigfoot. And very few researchers have the knowledge, the technology, or the skill set to debunk that. And so many believe that it's a real thing. That's why I prefer the old Instamatic cameras, the 35 millimeter cameras. When you look at a picture, you can't go and Photoshop that unless you're able to physically put something in that picture. So I prefer the hard copy, if you will, rather than the digital copy, because the digital copy can be manipulated, and there's too many people believing what's out there.
Yeah, for sure. And it just seems true. In my opinion. A lot of these videos, people just take the videos at face value. Like, doing your own research, really, in this day and age, sometimes it's just a matter of, clicking a few things to really find out if there's anything behind this video. If there's I posted in our CARC group, I posted this really compelling looking video of some guy out in his ATV. He was complaining about hearing weird noises on his property. So he's going around on his ATV with his flashlight, and just like off to the side, you see this bipedal figure kind of like squat down, as if like it's trying to duck for cover. It came out about like a week or so ago. So it looked really good at first. That brief glimpse, the guy didn't seem to notice it, but when I clicked on the account where the video was posted, this guy had like 2 or 3 other like Wendigo sightings or Dogman sighting videos and things like that, pretty much filmed out in the same in the same manner. So that to me like automatically diminishes any like credibility you could give that source where the the video came from. And it didn't take hours of academic research to come to that conclusion. It literally just took like a few clicks. So that's just my thing, like agreeing with what you said. People see a lot of these videos and stuff like that. They just see it as the video. A lot of them really don't think to think about things like context, where the video came from, try to get information about the person who posted the video. And that I really think definitely it makes a difference in filtering out like the potentially legit videos or outright fakes that are out there.
Well, that's what I was referring to. You have to do your own research, whether it's a couple of clicks, going to the location and taking measurements, talking to the witness in person, and getting as much data as you can. If you just look at a YouTube video and just take it for what it is, face value, and say, oh, yes, that's a Bigfoot, without doing any background searches or checks or going to the location or doing any research at all, you're doing yourself a disservice, because then you're accepting everything at face value. And most of it isn't a Bigfoot. I'm sorry to say. Most of it isn't what you hope it would be. It's probably a misidentification, shadows, light. It could be anything, really. You need to really vet your research and vet those videos, especially on YouTube, because, as I said earlier, there's so much garbage on there. It's unreal.
What percentage would you say, if you had to get like a ballpark figure, what percentage of videos out there do you think are just misidentifications or hoaxes?
I would say 10% of, and that's a generous 10% on YouTube is legit. I think the rest of it's misidentification. Well, let's stop and think about it for a second. Let's look at this logistically. If every one of those Bigfoot videos showed a Bigfoot. We'd have hundreds of thousands of Bigfoot across this country, and we simply don't. The population is nowhere near that size. We're lucky we may have 10 to 15,000 of these creatures in the United States.
Yeah.
And for everybody to go out and get a Bigfoot video, that doesn't happen. It just doesn't. I've been at this in the field investigating for 25 years, and I'm lucky I've caught some audio, found some footprints, but I've never captured anything on video that I can say is a Bigfoot. There are others that have been doing this a long time. John Green has never had a sighting himself. You know, there's people that have done. Stan Gordon, 62 years, and he's never seen a Bigfoot. So people that go out and I'm in my woods and I heard it's a stick break, and he spins the camera. Oh my gosh, there's a Bigfoot! There he goes, running through the trees. Oh my God, I got him! Bullshit. I'm sorry,
so
bullshit. True. It doesn't happen that often. These animals are very rare, and if you got one, the Patterson-Gimlin film, for example, and even that's controversial, you would have a better chance of winning the lottery than catching a Bigfoot on film. So just being honest with you guys.
Yeah, 100%.
I completely agree on that. Also, people in this field usually make a living at doing something else because this isn't a large income producing.
Right.
I know that one person, Adam Davies, is a science teacher in San Diego, California. I saw you studied radio. Are you still in radio for a living, or what? Can we ask what you're doing? What you can tell us?
No, radio doesn't pay. I went to college for broadcasting. I got a degree in communication, Bachelor's of Arts degree in communication. I've spent some time in radio, probably the first 10, 12 years of my career. I worked at multiple radio stations as an on-air personality, as a producer. I've done my own podcast from 2007 to about 2019. I ended it, and I have co-hosted with other podcasting. So I've always remained in media, but it doesn't pay. Unfortunately, I work now for a hospital in Pittsburgh. As I still use my communication degree, but I don't do the broadcasting anymore. Simply, it just doesn't pay. It's not feasible.
And plus, lately, a lot of places are cutting positions as well in that field, so that makes it a rough field to get into right now.
Yeah, anyway, a lot of it's becoming automated,
and that makes sense. And unfortunately, also it must be nice to go back and speak to all ages at a number of schools, clubs, organizations, to people who pay attention to like every word you say when you're doing a speech and everything. Can you tell us what it's like, and any places or organizations that you would like better for speaking, that you prefer to speak at better, I should say?
Well, I've been speaking now since 2000. So 21 years I've been presenting publicly on the subject. And I enjoy lecturing to folks, because when I lecture, I don't put it out there as the gospel truth. You know, I'd say you decide what you want to decide. I'm presenting the evidence based on the information that I've learned and studied and gained over the years of studying this phenomenon. So I'm going to share with you based on what we've learned. It's not factual evidence, because obviously science hasn't proven this animal exists. So this is based on what eyewitnesses are telling us. This is based on experiences the eyewitnesses share with us, and research information that has been shared with other researchers and investigators. So I present that. And I feel, and this is just my opinion, but I feel I get a better response and even more intelligent questions from lecturing to elementary school students, junior high school students. I've lectured for forestry departments. I've lectured for the Penn State Forestry Department, game wardens, state parks, Bigfoot conventions, paranormal conventions, libraries. I've lectured for pretty much any organization you can possibly think of, historical societies and whatnot. And they all ask great questions. They all seem pretty attentive, but the kids, they always seem well prepared. Their questions are very intelligent and well framed when they ask the questions, and they always seem very eager to learn. So I always enjoy speaking to schools, and especially the elementary and middle schools. Those are the best.
Well, that's awesome. Also, can you tell us a little bit about the Pennsylvania Bigfoot Society?
Sure. As I mentioned, back in 1997, I got into this with two other gentlemen, Steve Anderson and Henry Benton. And Steve and Henry were the actual co-founders of the Pennsylvania Bigfoot Society. They founded the organization, and a lot of people think that I did. I didn't. I was one of the first members of the group, But in 1999, 2000, Steve had some personal issues where he needed to take a break from the group and kind of focus on his personal life, his family, and whatnot. And he asked me to take over. And to be honest with you, I never had a leadership role other than maybe a programming director position at the college radio station, or maybe a supervisor position at a job that I worked part-time, stuff like that. But I never had a leadership role as far as Bigfoot goes or any kind of an organized group. But with reluctance, I agreed to take over and try to do the best I could. And from that point, from 2000 when I took over, we ran successfully as one of the most respected and well-organized organizations in the country. And we were together for about 17 years to about 2016. I left the group in 2014 due to personal reasons, but when 2019 came along, COVID came along, some of the former members reached out to me and said, hey, we need this group. We need to put it back together. We need to start fielding reports and sightings and whatnot. So I agreed, and we got back together in 2020. We officially relaunched the group. But for at least 17 years, we investigated hundreds of cases across Pennsylvania, into Ohio, Maryland, West Virginia, New York, New Jersey. And we had, at one point, the highest number of members we had was, I think, 150 plus members in the group. And these are people from all backgrounds of experience, whether they be law enforcement, outdoorsmen, blue-collar, white-collar workers. We had a variety of different experiences, experienced folks in the group, and we investigated sighting reports from all over the Commonwealth. And we had some really good cases over the years, some pretty fascinating things that we've investigated.
I was wondering if I could ask you two questions on that, two quick questions on that topic, Eric. The first one, first one, compared to the last couple of decades, comparing the last 20 years to the last couple of decades, based on your experience and research, would you say that sightings of these creatures are on the rise, or kind of stay more the same? And then the second question, as a sort of follow up to that, in your experience, what have witnesses seemed to be doing the most at the time of like an actual sighting that they had?
For our organization and for myself and independently, I think the sightings have remained the same. Some years they fluctuate. Some years they get a little more. Some years they die down depending on weather patterns, depending on certain circumstances, whether people are out more, whether they just want to report it or not. That's based on from our perspective, the Pennsylvania Bigfoot Society, and from my independent researching. I know our good friend Stan Gordon, he gets dozens and dozens of phone calls a week, whether it be Bigfoot encounters or UFO encounters. He's always getting sightings turned into him, and rightfully so. He's probably the most well-known researcher in the East Coast. So he does field a lot of reports and cases. As I mentioned earlier about social media, I think that's kind of boosted the interest in the subject matter, as well as the public interest, not just researchers, but the public interest. And therefore, I think a lot more sightings are being reported that may not necessarily be legitimate sightings. But we haven't really seen an influx of more sightings over the past 20 years. It's remained about the same. Your second question, I'm not sure how to answer that.
Here, if I could put it in like four categories, like whether they were driving, they were at a private residence or property, engaged in some type of outdoor recreation like fishing, hunting, camping.
Right.
I mean fishing, camping, or hiking, hunting, and then just like miscellaneous.
It's like I said, I'm not sure how to answer that because we get such an influx of so many different types of sightings. I know if you look at the database across the country, probably the most popular form of sighting or the most occurred sighting would be the road crossings. A creature runs across the road in front of a vehicle. That's not necessarily the case with us. I mean, we've had our share, but it's a mixed bag. So like I said, I'm really not sure how to answer that because we've gotten a little bit of everything. You see those cases where people are outdoors hunting, camping, and hiking, and fishing, and whatnot, and they're having their experiences or their encounters, and then they report them. We've gotten our share of creatures being seen or experienced around people's homesteads, around their private property, coming around, whether it's farmland or rural or even suburban neighborhoods. We're getting these reports of these creatures coming around homes, and whether it's domesticated animals or farm animals, that they seem to come around with these animals or out more often. And we get those cases where they're peeking through the kitchen window or through a bedroom window, or if somebody happens to look out the front living room window and sees one walking across their front yard or field. It's a really difficult question to say what ranks most with us, because it's been an influx of pretty much everything.
All right. Can I ask, what are your thoughts on Bigfoot? Do you think it's flesh and blood, supernatural, and why?
To be perfectly honest with you, I'm not sure what a Bigfoot is. And I think if anybody says they know what a Bigfoot is, they're fooling themselves. Simply because we don't have either a live specimen that we can study in its natural habitat, or a dead specimen that can be picked apart to see what it's made of. Whether it falls into the ape category or more of a human category, being closer related to us, or if it's a completely unrelated species altogether. People can theorize and guess, and my guess is I don't know what it is, simply because so much has changed in the thinking, and some of the eyewitness reports over the years. There's been some reports of high strangeness that have happened concerning these animals, and I've started to see patterns where that's concerned. So I really don't know what this animal is. I don't want to make a leap and say that it's paranormal, or that it's interdimensional, or maybe even comes down from an alien, a ship, or a UFO, because I simply don't know. But I have gotten those types of cases, and I've investigated those cases. When I first got into this and reading those books by my elders and some of the people I looked up to and respected, my mindset was fully that this was a flesh and blood animal, no question, no doubt about it. This was just an undiscovered primate. But the longer I've been in this and studying this and studying Stan's work as well as others, I started to see that maybe there's more to this than we realize. I mean, let's think about this logically for a second. We've been at this for modern history has been at this about 60 years, maybe 70 years now, and we still don't have a body, and we still don't have definitive proof. We're getting some anecdotal proof and some circumstantial proof that may prove the animal does exist in a court of law, but to the scientific board, scientific community, it doesn't. Otherwise, they would have stepped up and said, okay, yes, it's a real animal. This is what it is. So with 70 years of research, 60, 70 years of research, why haven't we found conclusive proof yet? Why don't we have a body? Why don't we have DNA that proves it once and for all? These are very nagging questions that a lot of researchers ask themselves. And there really isn't a reason why we don't have a body. We should have one by now. There's so many animals, even if they're a small breeding population, one should have been hit by a car. One should have been shot by a hunter. One should have been killed or found naturally in the forest. We should have some kind of remains to prove this once and for all, but we don't. And why is that? So as an objective researcher, and someone looks as, even having an open mind, I look at the subject as a full picture, not just what I want it to be. I look at this from a broad scale, and I see, okay, well, maybe we need to entertain this possibility, or maybe we need to look at this possibility and see if there's more to it. Whether or not there is, we can make that determination once we look into that aspect of it. But at this point, I just don't know. There's not enough data collected. There's not enough solid physical evidence collected to really say what this animal is.
I've heard a lot of stories. I've heard a good amount of stories of people hitting them or shooting them, and a lot of people claim to have just hushed up about it, or they got quote visited by supposed government officials or whatever who confiscated the body, put them under gag orders. Do you think there's anything to those stories, or do you think it's just just that stories, just tall tales?
Well,
instances like that.
Again, that's hard to say. I've never been contacted by the government. I believe maybe I've had my phone tapped maybe one time talking to another Bigfoot researcher. We heard some clicking on the line. We heard breathing. We heard a little bit of static, but that could have been just the phone company for all I know. But I've never had any experiences or run-ins with the government. Studying other researchers' work and talking with other researchers, some of them have. Stan Gordon's told me he's had government researchers come right to his home and sit down and tell him okay, there's a lab that if you ever find anything, you need to call this number. You need to report it.
Wow.
Now, then there's other witnesses who've said over the years that they've been approached by government, whether it be the men in black, as you call them, the MIBs, or actual Air Force or Navy or Army, whatever, have come to their home and said, okay, we know about Bigfoot. You can't talk about Bigfoot. We're going to do this if you do. There's some that have claimed that, but I've never seen the proof of that claim other than them telling me their words. So do I think the government has an interest in it? Probably. I'm sure they have some kind of interest in it, but to what degree, I don't know. And I guess until I have that experience, I won't be able to tell you for certain. I can only go by what other people have told me.
For sure. So, just kind of like, so like, I really don't try to like delve down that, government cover up, conspiracy rabbit hole too much. Just, for like the sake of conversation though, one of the only things I could think of is, if there really is like an effort to, for whatever reason, cover up the potential existence of a creature like this. One of the only things I could think of is, they're probably, maybe it's, maybe it would be for its well-being, but the other thing I could think of is, what if they're worried about, what the public reaction would be to confirming that, something like this is actually out there? Like, in your opinion, how do you think the general public would handle something like that? Like, do you think there'd be a certain degree of hysteria that, because like if something like that came out, it would definitely challenge the paradigm of like, what we've been conditioned growing up to, what we've been taught to like believe what was real and what isn't. What kind of shockwaves do you think that would send out to the general public, like if and when we finally confirm that this is a real thing?
I don't think it would send out shockwaves at all. I think the public has become so dumbed down and numb from what's being reported today that they find a lot of the information out there is false news or fake news, if you will. And I just don't think that there's people would have that much concern about this creature being proven. The people who believe in it, the people who research it and study it, would probably be like, "See, I told you, I was right all along." Mm-hmm. But I don't think there's going to be panic. I don't think there's going to be an outbreak of people running to the stores to buy guns, to go right out in the forest and shoot and kill one. I do think that if this animal were declared a living species or an extinct species even, there would right away be protections put on this animal, whether it be an endangered species protection or some kind of anti-hunting protection on the animal itself. Much like the UFO phenomenon, the government's starting to release bits and pieces. And if you notice the reaction, and it's just been going on since the 1970s. I mean, look at the films that have come out. I think that it's kind of a conditioning in regard to the UFO field. And that might be what's going on for the Bigfoot field as well. Maybe they're conditioning us to let us eventually know that these things are real. It's hard to say, but I don't think there'd be any kind of panic or any kind of upheaval or, sure, you're going to have the people, the religious folks who are adamant against creationism versus evolution, those kind of believers. They're going to say, no, it can't be close to us because God created us. You're going to have that theory and you're going to have those beliefs. You're going to have people that say, this is an endangered species, let's protect it. And you're going to have people trying to cordon off sections of the woods doing protests and whatnot. You're going to have that no matter what subject it is. You're always going to have those groups of people. But I don't think there's going to be widespread panic or anything like that. I think people are going to go about their daily lives just like they normally do.
There was another theory that said, if this thing were to be real, they would, they're, like you said, like with protection efforts, they would probably have to like set aside large swaths of land. And one theory is, like maybe the potential cover-up effort is because they're worried about like what setting those large swaths of land like that, what the ramifications would be for, maybe from even like an economic standpoint. Like a lot of industries like the timber industry, land development, construction industry. I'm not sure. I know in the United States alone, like it employs millions and millions of people. I don't know what the numbers are, in these purported hotspots, but what are your thoughts on that?
Again, it's hard to say what what would happen in that situation, whether they would face blowback or feedback for setting aside preserves or habitat for this creature. Could it have an economic impact? Sure, I suppose it could. I'm not sure the size of it. I'm not sure how big of an economic impact it would have, but I'm sure it would have some. I remember the example of the spotted owl from Oregon years ago that they thought was extinct, and it made a big stink for a little while, but then it went away, and nobody really talks about it anymore today. So I think it might have a little bit, but I don't think it's going to have a tremendous amount of impact. It depends on, I guess, the area that they decide to preserve. And I would think that they would have areas set up like state game lands like they do now, or nature habitats or preserves, just like they do for other wildlife and other animals. It remains to be seen what will happen, but I don't think it'll have that big of an impact.
What's your thoughts on Patterson Gimlin?
A lot of people seem to, they get the impression I'm more of a skeptical researcher, and I am to a point. I mean, I've got to see it to believe it, and I've always been that way. And even people I love dearly, like family members, have had their experiences, and I've had my own experiences that I'm very skeptical about, and I still doubt that I saw what I think I saw, or people tell me I saw, and same with them. So I have to really experience and see it without a shadow of a doubt to know it's real. And the same thing goes with the Patterson Gimlin film. I want to believe it's real. I want to say that is a creature in a suit, and I've heard the arguments from both sides. I've heard people saying it can't be someone in a suit. You can see muscles, and you can see bulging, herniated muscles, and you can see muscles ripple down the back and its legs, and it walks a certain way. Humans can't replicate that. And there's a lot of good, strong points for it being a real animal. There are also a lot of good arguments for it being someone in a suit, or it being fabricated, and more so it's coming out more and more now that people have found archive footage of Bob Gimlin changing his story and changing it in several different ways over the years. And I love Bob, don't get me wrong. I've met him several times. I think he's a wonderful human being, and I may equate that to him getting older and maybe not recollecting as well as he did, but they're coming out with these archive footages that you can find on different social media platforms that he tells a different story. And if that's the case, that may be damning to the actual fact that the creature's real. I sit on the fence on it. I really do. Some days I think it's a creature. Some days I think it's a guy in a suit. And I don't think we'll ever fully know, unfortunately. I believe Bob's 82 or 83 years old now. He's getting up there in age, and unfortunately he won't be with us much longer. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but realistically, and once he's gone, he's the last witness who was there that day. And I just don't think it's ever going to be proven one way or the other. And to be perfectly honest with you, if it was proven today that it was a hoax, that still wouldn't change the way I research or my thoughts and my passion on the subject matter. I'd still continue to research and investigate. It's just one piece of the puzzle to me.
Yeah, because like a lot of people out there, it seems like a lot of people think that just people who just like scratch the surface of the stuff, or just have like rudimentary knowledge about it in general, seem to think like the Patterson Gimlin film is what started this whole craze on this creature. In reality, like one of the things I like to do when I do my own remote when I do like remote research, I like to go through like newspaper archives and just look at and just try to find reports from like the early the early to mid 20th century, and I found a good amount just like the Northeast reports dating back to like late 19th century, 20s, 30s of people encountering hairy ape-like bipedal creatures that their descriptions say would universally be recognized. The descriptions say attributes what we universally recognize as a Sasquatch or Bigfoot or a Bigfoot. So that's just like one thing I always like to throw out there when because like a lot of people don't consider the film like the holy grail of evidence. I'm definitely sure if it were to come out that it was a hoax, it would probably be a deal breaker to a lot of people. But I think more so in the sense that it would be a deal breaker because like a lot of people would think I think a lot of people are under the impression that this here is what started this whole, like phenomena, delving into this topic, when in reality, it's been around just under it's just been called like different things across the country dating back, decades, centuries before that video even came out.
Let me show you something. You see back there, you see those binders on the back shelf back there? There's over 15,000 newspaper articles that I've collected on the subject of Sasquatch. And that's not just from Pennsylvania, that's from all over the United States, from Canada, from China, from Russia, dating back to the 1700s. And it's not called Bigfoot in all the articles. Of course, there are other articles in there that talk about wild men, bear man, strange beasts in the forests. Literally 10 to 15,000 articles back there in those binders. And it's broken down by decades. And I have articles, like I said, from the 1700s I can pull out and share with you guys. But what I find fascinating is, and let's face it, media likes to sensationalize things. That's how they sell newspapers. They embellish the story. But behind each story they put out, there is a kernel of truth. Somebody saw something. So dating back to the 1700s, when we first started coming to this country, maybe a little bit before that, people were seeing something. Even the Native American ancestors were seeing something and experiencing. They have legends and stories in their tribal lore that talk about coexisting or revering these animals, these creatures. And there's a long, long history that goes way back farther than the Patterson-Gimlin film. If you really do your due diligence and research, you'll find that out. And you're very wise for doing that, for looking at those newspaper articles, because that's history right there. That the story may not be 100% accurate or true, but as I mentioned, there's some kernel to that truth. And somebody saw something, they experienced something. And a lot of people don't know this. The term Bigfoot didn't come about until October of 1958. So prior to that, it was known as wild men. That's what people associated, wild women of the forest, or the Native American names that the tribes gave it based on your territory, where you're from. Here in Pennsylvania, especially the northwestern part of the state, down into Pittsburgh area, that sort of thing. The Iroquois Seneca Nation, they called it the Genesqua, or the Stonish Giant. And so, there's dozens, if not hundreds, of names for this creature in our Native American lore and legend. If you just look it up, you can find it.
I think there's I was listening to one of your podcasts, and I was listening to a podcast you would recently been on a couple of weeks ago. You actually brought this up. I think you said there were over like 200 tribes in North America alone that have a name for this thing.
Yeah,
and that for me is one of the more, and that's actually like factual data there. From a documentation standpoint, and that to me is one of the most like compelling pieces of evidence out there that gives me, that really makes me believe in the possibility that something like this could exist.
Right.
Have you had if you've ever used that in like a discussion versus if you ever use that in like a discussion versus a skeptic, you ask them if you've ever asked them before, how do you explain that in North America alone, hundreds of indigenous tribes that had no contact with each other, all of them in their lore have a creature, whose description matches what, we call, say, a Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Have you ever been able to ask a skeptic or, like a non-believer that question? If so, what was their response to that?
Well, I've had that discussion that this isn't just a modern phenomenon. There is a long history to it, whether it be Native American tales or, as I mentioned, the newspaper articles. And the feedback I get from that, it's still a skeptical answer. It's basically, all they are is stories. They're tales and stories. There's no proof. There's no evidence that these things really existed back then. They're stories, and they're made up to scare kids or to keep the braves or the younger generation of the tribe in the camp at night, to keep them out of the woods. The boogeyman lives there. That's all they are stories. That's the argument I get back. And they're right to a point. That's all they really are stories to us. But to them, they are real things. They dealt with these things. They documented it. Maybe they did share some of these stories to keep their kids out of the forest, but there had to be a reason for these stories. There had to be something that caused them to come up with these stories. So unfortunately, you're never going to win an argument with a skeptic, no matter, even if you drop the dead Bigfoot in their lap, they're always going to have some kind of argument against that being a dead Bigfoot in their lab. So I find it exhilarating to argue with a skeptic, not argue, but debate with a skeptic. Because I said, I'm a skeptic to a point myself. I want this animal to be real, but I'm very skeptical of a lot of things, and you have to be. So I kind of agree with their point. In order to really prove the animal exists, you have to keep a skeptical mind.
Sure.
Also, and I agree as well. You have to look into stuff and try to verify as much as you can. Also, though, people always think of the Northwest as being big for Bigfoot. Why is Pennsylvania also? Any idea why Pennsylvania is also a big hot spot for Bigfoot sightings?
Interestingly enough, and it's kind of funny you bring this up.
Uh-oh.
Well, looks like he conked out there.
Well, hopefully he will be back in a moment. This is one of those awkward moments where I don't really know what to say now.
Worst case scenario, hopefully Bill and Mark are edit this part out since it's pre-recorded.
Yes, hopefully they can. Yes.
But as we're waiting,
go ahead.
Yeah, as we're waiting until we get Eric reconnected. Bill. Okay. Just I guess let's just recap everything we just discussed. It was interesting though to me when Eric said that when he talks to skeptics, and when he talks to skeptics about things like that, it was interesting to me how he mentioned their common response is, oh well, they're just stories. Well, the talking point there isn't really about whether or not they're stories. It's about the particular details in the stories. Like to me, over 200 indigenous tribes that have had no contact with each other, it just seems like too big of a coincidence that they're all going to come up with a creature whose description universally matches what we consider today as a Bigfoot or Squatch. It just seems interesting that they're that they ignore that particular detail.
Sorry, guys, my laptop battery died on me.
That,
I thought I had a good plug plugged into it, but it just crashed. Sorry.
Hey, no problem.
Where were we?
We were talking about why Pennsylvania is a hot spot for Bigfoot sightings.
Yeah, that's actually a fascinating question. A lot of people seem to have the general conception the Pacific Northwest is the home of Bigfoot. And it has been, I think, based on what the media portrays, what newspapers portray. And I think a lot of people have accepted that Bigfoot's more to be found in the Pacific Northwest, when in fact, the East Coast, especially the Appalachian mountain range from all the way up to Maine, all the way south to even Florida, we have probably per square mile, if you want to call it that, square foot, we have more sightings than the Pacific Northwest does. And that might be a tribute to we have a bigger population, because we certainly don't have more remote land than the Pacific Northwest does. But there are actually more sightings here in the East Coast than there are the Pacific Northwest. And why I think Pennsylvania has a high number of sightings is because the Appalachian Mountains run through us. And basically you have the foothills on both sides of the state. In the western part of the state, we've got foothills in Pittsburgh and southwestern Pennsylvania, even that falls into southeastern Ohio. And that's why I think Pennsylvania's ranked pretty high up there as far as sightings go. And I think my battery's going to die again. So you have to bear with me here a second while I try to get this plug working. I don't know why it's not working. So if you guys want to talk amongst yourselves while I get this ironed out, I'll be just a minute.
All right. Thank you. Oh, you're muted, Mike. Mike, you're muted. Oh.
It's actually really interesting how he mentions, there's more sightings out east than in the than the Pacific Northwest in that regard. I mean, our time, we've spent the majority of our time, I feel, out in the field in different parts of Pennsylvania, and we've gotten a lot. We've gotten a good amount of potential activity and different kinds of it too. It really seems like, I guess. What would you say some the major components are that you need? Food, water, and cover.
Definitely, and there's enough isolated areas you can go to in Pennsylvania.
Oh yeah,
where they can hide at least for a while.
Yeah, and like a lot of people when they think of PA, they just think of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole lot of land in between those two cities. A lot of it's true. Yeah, a lot of it's woods, mountains, farms. There's not a lot of people out there.
It's Welcome the curse of Bigfoot. Yeah, my laptop I think is going to die on me here in a little bit, but yeah, I had it nice and charged, and I have a good plug plugged into it. For some reason, it's not holding a charge, so it's a brand new laptop. I don't know, but I apologize to your listeners and your followers. Pennsylvania, for some reason, and it's not just Bigfoot, but it's all weird phenomenon. For hundreds of years, there's been strange phenomenon in this state, whether it be UFO sightings, haunted locations. There's so many places that are haunted, and UFOs are seen by the thousands in the state. And Bigfoot sightings, there's no one particular area in the state that I feel is a hot spot. They're seen everywhere, whether it's the Allegheny National Forest in the northwestern part of the state, the Chestnut Ridge where I live and research at here in the southwestern part of the state. Even over in York and Lancaster, there's been sightings reported over there, going up into the northeastern part of the state, Bradford County, Tionesta, not Tionesta, but Towanda, Wyalusing, all the way up into the Poconos, the New York state line. Once you get to the northern part of the state, up by State Route 6, it's a pretty remote, rugged area up there. It's always just been a weird area for just weird different creatures being reported and sighted, and all weird phenomenon. And why? We have perfect habitat. We've got an abundance of deer and large game, small game. We've got plenty of farmlands and water sources. That's a big factor that you need for a Sasquatch to survive is water. And we have some years we have over 40 inches of rainfall. Some years we have less, but we have enough that keeps the population sustainable. It provides enough food, enough cover, enough shelter, enough habitat. And I think that's beneficial to a Sasquatch and what it needs to survive. So Pennsylvania is just as good a state as any for these animals to be here.
Yeah, there's some researchers believe there's a correlation between hot spots for these creatures having high levels of rainfall. Pacific Northwest, Washington State has I think it has the only rainforest in the United States because of how much rainfall they get there. I believe southeastern Ohio gets a fair amount. It gets pretty high volume of rain every year. I guess I guess that's the case out in western PA too. How much have you delved into that possible correlation? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we've had sightings here, as I said, for hundreds of years, and we see some years we get more than average rainfall. As you know, we have pretty harsh winters, and take that into account with the water that comes down as well as the rain. Some years we have very dry years, and I really haven't seen a really extensive pattern, if you will, to say that it's rainfall that's causing these creatures to be here. But I do think it does play a role in the habitat and providing food source and a lush forest and fruits and vegetables and berries and that stuff that this animal needs to survive. So I think that there is a plenty ample area, habitat, if you will, food source, a water source, the rainfall that even though it may be sporadic and change from year to year, we still have enough to sustain an animal of this size.
Sure.
All right. Well, now let's get into some of your more recent investigations. One of your more recent ones in Fayette County. How is that one going?
Now that I've pissed off all the listeners with my answers.
Well, we have some pictures. Could you talk about the pictures in general?
Sure.
There's a possibility some are going to be just repeat or side angles as well of a reason, something you just talked about a moment ago. Go ahead.
Yeah, this was reported to me on May the 20th, just around midnight that night, over Facebook of all places. That's how the person got a hold of me. This was a roadside road crossing that occurred at dark, and the creature crossed just if you can see the yellow caution sign on the right-hand side, it crossed from left to right across the road in front of all things, an ambulance. It had 2 EMS workers on the ambulance driving that direction. And you can see the skid marks. That's not from them, but that's the direction it was driving. And it took 3 steps, very large, pronounced leaps almost across the road. And it went up that embankment you see right there. That's on the right side of the road, me standing on the left. And it made a trail up that pretty steep embankment, up that weeds and grass and whatnot, up into the woods behind that. And when I got on site, I spoke to the witness in the morning around 8 o'clock, 7:30, 8 o'clock, and she told me what they experienced, what they saw. We went to the location. We met with her and her husband. Her husband went back to that location later that night with her, and they looked for whatever they could find, but they couldn't find anything. But this is the only place where it crossed that we found these large impressions in that tall grass and the weeds there. You can see them pretty pronounced going up the hill, and they measured about 5 feet between each impression in the ground, except for the first one coming off the embankment. And I find that interesting because as steep as that embankment was, for someone to go up it, they could probably walk up it, but they'd have a real hard time stepping 5 feet between each impression in the ground. That it was just very wet and kind of hard to really climb. And if it was a bear that crossed there, the bear would unlikely go up the embankment on its hind legs, on its 2 legs. It would crawl up on all 4. And that's not the case. It went up, as she said, she saw it start to go up the embankment on 2 legs and disappeared. That's really the only physical evidence that we found is that trail that went through that brush and weeds. And those, again, are just looking at a different way.
All right. Well, that's
where the animal came
That's
up.
awesome.
That area,
right.
incidentally, has a long history of sightings. The first one was actually documented and recorded by Stan Gordon. He talked to the witness who had a sighting there in 1938. And actually only about a half a mile from that location. It was a young girl who used to play in her backyard with her sister, and they had several encounters with Sasquatch. And then we found out from further investigating that someone else in the area had a sighting, a road crossing sighting, only maybe a quarter of a mile down the road from where the people in the ambulance saw the creature, in this case here. We've talked to other people, and word of mouth, we began to find out that there are creatures being reported in the area.
That is awesome. Also, I saw a Facebook post in which you said you were speaking with a former game warden, park
Yes.
ranger, law enforcement officer, current U.S. Forestry Service employee. I know that the game wardens are not going to talk. They don't like to talk about wolves or cougars, for example. So they're not going to talk much about Bigfoot. That's amazing. You got someone like that who's willing to talk. Anything you can tell us about your talk with him? I'm sorry.
Sure. Yeah. That was an interesting phone conversation with this gentleman. He reached out to me because some of the experiences that he's had and that his father had. His father had a sighting, and before his father passed away, on his deathbed, his father told him, don't keep this information quiet. Share it with someone who will find the information useful and maybe able to look further at it to see if, they can get any physical evidence or anything to prove that this animal's real. So that's what this gentleman did is he, on his father's request, he decided to reach out and talk to somebody about. And during my phone conversation with him, and I've only talked to him on the phone so far, I haven't met with him in person. That's in the works. We're going to be doing that in the next couple of weeks. But talking with him on the phone, he was very open and very honest about his encounters. And one of the questions I did ask him is, I've been doing this for a long time and studying this for a long time, and it's not something that's common where someone in the forestry department or a wildlife game warden or wildlife officer or even a law enforcement officer will come forward and share their encounters. It's something that they just don't talk about. Definitely. Whether it's employment reasons, personal reasons, fear of ridicule, whatever, they just normally don't talk about it. And I asked him, have you talked to your superiors? Have you talked to your coworkers? What do they think about the phenomenon? And his answer was what I expected. He hadn't talked to his superiors or coworkers. The mindset of some of his coworkers are the ones who live in the forest, The ones who live in very remote areas know it's out there. They know it's real based on their experiences or knowing people who've had experiences. The ones who come from the city or from more populated areas, not so much. They don't think it's possible the animal that we call Bigfoot exists here in Pennsylvania especially. But the ones who live in more remote places or have more possibility of having an encounter or know somebody that had an encounter, they know it's out there. They just don't talk about it. So I found that kind of reaffirms, what my suspicions were, what other researchers' suspicions were over the years, that, there is kind of a hushed tone, if you will, with the whole phenomenon. Not so much because they were threatened or told not to talk about it, they lose their job. It's more just kind of, they don't want to be ridiculed. They want to keep their status in their job. They want to keep their credibility in their job to be taken seriously. And as soon as somebody starts talking about Bigfoot, it's the public mindset that this guy's a Looney Tune, or somebody that you don't want to deal with, or he doesn't have all the screws right in his head. So a lot of people that don't come out publicly about this, that only shared this with researchers such as myself, do so on the condition of anonymity, where they don't give out their name or where they live. And that's why we're being really careful as to who this gentleman is, where he's from, and what information we can share. I can say that, yes, he based on what we've talked on the phone, he is claiming that he is a former law enforcement officer. He worked as a game warden. He's currently volunteering and working for the state forestry department. And he's done this most of his life, for about 40 or 50 years now. He's in his mid to late 60s now. So based on what he's shared with me on the phone, and again, I can't prove this. I don't see his credentials. I just talked to him on the phone, but based on what he's told me, I believe that he is telling the truth. He's had some rather interesting occurrences, and he shared with me some sightings that people have come forward and shared with him. So it was an hour and a half long conversation, and I found it fascinating.
Well, that is awesome. It's great that you have someone like that who's come to you. That's just awesome, because the odds, because it would be almost impossible to find someone who will come to you like that. Also, we've had some guests on, Stephen Stroyford and Michael Merchant. They talked about some of the TV shows. I want to know how some stuff obviously gets faked or exaggerated for entertainment purposes. How was it when you were dealing with the TV shows?
When I dealt with Paranormal Declassified, they did edit some of my conversation with them, because in the show, the host of the show found a structure in the forest, and it to me looked like a lean-to that was probably built by Boy Scouts or a person. And they kind of edited what I said to make it sound like, oh yeah, I've seen these structures before, and yeah, they could be a Bigfoot. And I didn't say that. I said it looks like it was made by a person. So I know, for content reasons and to draw ratings and people watching the show, they have to provide entertainment value, and they will edit. They will edit based on what they want to be portrayed on the show. He also has made the claim that I'm an expert on finding and studying these stick formations and these structures. That's not true. Not true at all. As a matter of fact, I've found some of these, and I've had witnesses show me them. I don't know if they're legitimate. I don't know if they're structures made by a Bigfoot. They look like cocoons, or they look like igloos, and it might be natural. It might be a natural formation, briars and leaves and bushes are making. I don't know, but I'm no way near an expert, but they portray me as to be an expert on that subject. And that's not the case. So I know that they do change things for people to be on the shows, and they do change what they say to fit their narrative and to fit the subject matter on the show. And yes, it's for entertainment purposes. So a lot of what you see on Finding Bigfoot and Expedition Bigfoot and these other TV shows aren't necessarily the truth. They may be versions of the truth, but in order to keep people tuning in each week and watching it to see what happens next, they have to provide some kind of element of intrigue or suspense or tension, because let's face it, you're a researcher, when we go out researching in the forest, nothing happens every time you go out. It's often pretty boring, pretty mundane. You can sit in the woods and listen to coyotes bark and owls howl and hoot, and that's all you hear. and it can be pretty boring, and the general public's not going to want to see a researcher sitting in the woods in the dark with nothing happening. So they have to make something happen, and in order to keep the viewers coming back. So that's my take on TV shows. I've done several of them over the years, and I've done several documentaries. At least with the documentaries, they don't edit out what you say and make you seem to be something you're not.
Mm-hmm.
But the TV shows can do that, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately, we'll do that. Any shows you're going to be on that are coming up soon?
I am scheduled to do a couple of more documentary films, and I can't talk about what they are right now because they're in pre-production. Okay. But they should be released probably in the next year to 2 years. As far as TV appearances go, I don't have anything currently booked. I was working with some producers about a show possibly here in the Pacific, or not the Pacific Northwest, my mindset on that line of thinking, but here in the East Coast, mainly the Chestnut Ridge. I was in talks with several producers, and then all of a sudden they just disappeared. And that happens with dealing with TV producers. They have a great subject and then they just vanish. I don't have anything else lined up in the works currently. Okay. I'm kind of currently focusing on field research right now and getting out with team members and hitting the woods every weekend when I can, time permits. So that's where everything is right now with me.
Also, you founded the Pennsylvania Cryptozoology Society to investigate a few strange animals and obviously other cryptid cases. Can you tell us about one of your best stories of such an investigation and anything you might be investigating now?
Currently, I'm not investigating anything right now with the Cryptozoology Society. And the reason we put the group together was because occasionally we get reports outside of the realm of Bigfoot, other cryptids. So I thought maybe it might be beneficial to have a small group, kind of like an offshoot of the Pennsylvania Bigfoot Society, to investigate those cases when they come in. And we've gotten some cases over the years, whether they be Thunderbird cases or Eastern Cougar or Mountain Lion, if you will, cases. We've got a couple of Dogman cases, although I'm not completely sold on the Dogman phenomenon. We've gotten cases like that. I'll share one with you real quick. The Dogman case that we had from about 4 or 5 years ago came to me through Butch Witkowski, who is also a member of the Pennsylvania Cryptozoology Society, and he's a UFO Fortean researcher from the eastern part of the state. And he sent me a case to follow up on. And it was basically 3 women were out driving on a backcountry road, and they were looking for hiking trails to hike for the afternoon. And they found a little pullover on the side of the road at the trailhead. They decided that's where they were going to hike. One of the women got out of the truck or the vehicle prior to the other 2 women. She decided to start walking down the trailhead a little bit ahead of the other 2 women and got around this big boulder rock formation on the side of the trail. And that's when she claims a dog man-like creature or an upright walking canine came out of the forest and approached her. And she was very within really close proximity of it. She could see it was definitely not a Bigfoot. It had a snout, had pointed ears, had a tail on it like a canine. It was up on 2 legs, its rear legs. The front legs kind of hung down a little bit more so that not sticking out like a bear would, but kind of hanging down a little bit. The animal obviously didn't like her there, so it began to growl at her and grunt. It was enough that it turned her around, got her back into the vehicle while her friends were still getting ready to go into the forest. And when she turned to go back into the vehicle, this thing turned around to go back into the forest and disappeared. And I wanted to talk with her on the phone. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to. Her husband kind of poshed the whole idea and said, hey, let's not talk about this because we don't want people thinking we're crazy, and we don't want people, locking us up. So let's keep this quiet. And I tried to explain that, we respect the condition of privacy, and keeping all information confidential. And she still wouldn't talk to me. So I never had a chance to really meet her in person and talk to her about her encounter. It was just passed on to me based on the case. And I went up to where she said it happened, and I looked around the area. I didn't find any physical evidence or any signs of this animal being around. So I can't say whether or not she truly had her experience based on what little information I have.
Also, we're going to wrap it up in a little bit here. Any appearances you have coming up, or where you might be lecturing soon?
Yeah, I just finished 2 lectures, one in Gettysburg and one at the Ohio State Reformatory last month, in May and in June. I booked in November for the Weird and Wild Con in West Virginia. That's coming up on November 5th and 6th. And it's in the southern part of the state. I'm not booking very many events right now simply because of COVID. And even though I've been vaccinated, I still don't want to risk my family or put anybody else at risk. So I'm trying to avoid big conventions as much as possible until we're finally over this. And then I'll get back into lecturing again. I've been asked by several different groups and organizations and libraries, historical societies, to do some Zoom lectures, which are probably going to set up and organize. But those are down the road a little bit. But right now, podcasts, I've kind of cut them out of my schedule, and as well as public speaking. And I don't have the time to really do either of the podcasts or public lecturing. My schedule's so busy with the new job I just started and working weekends and having such a crazy schedule that I just don't have the time to do it like I used to right now. Hopefully that'll change, and then I can get back to doing things that I love to do. But for right now, that's where things stand.
How about writing a book? I saw you were working on a book. How's that going? What's going? What's the status on that, may I ask?
I've been working on a book. I've been working on a book now for about 25 years.
Oh, wow.
I'm not a writer, and I've been asked to write, and I've contributed chapters to different books and contributed articles and written articles and stuff like that. My grammar's terrible. I'll be honest with you. I'm just not someone who can write well. I do write. I'm told I write pretty well or pretty decent field reports, and that's fine. But I'm not a book writer. I don't. Maybe it's ADHD. I don't know, but I don't have a long attention span when it comes down to sitting down and writing chapter after chapter after chapter. And maybe someday I'll get the time to do it. I start writing something and I set it aside, and that's where it stays. So I have little bits and pieces here and there throughout my past 25 years. Maybe one day I'll get to it.
That's awesome. Well, also, I want to mention to everybody at ericaltman.net, you can check out his appearances, also other DVDs and TV programs he's appeared on, lectures to find out about his upcoming events. Of course, the one he just mentioned, he's going to be appearing at Wild and Weird Con, Saturday, November 5th and November 6th in West Virginia. All right, well, that wraps up what I had. Thank you for being on our show. Is there anything else you'd like to add to people? Tell people? Can you give it? We don't have it. We'll have to add it to, or have the mods add it on the show. But can you give us your email address? People can contact you if it's okay with you.
Sure. Yeah. Eric H. Altman at yahoo.com is my email address. You can find me on Facebook to get a hold of me there through the Pennsylvania Bigfoot Society, which is PA Bigfoot Society at gmail.com. Or no, I'm sorry, Pennsylvania Bigfoot Society at gmail.com. You can get a hold of me there. And that's pretty much it. On the website, pabigfoot.com, I have my contact information listed there, and you can reach me through that.
All right. Well, I want to take an opportunity to thank everyone for watching, and hope you enjoyed the show. And thank you, Eric, for joining us. And Bill, I guess go ahead and take us out if you could, please.
Good night from behind tall trees. If you enjoyed the previous program, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and leave a comment.